G7 leaders now turning their attention to China, calling on Beijing to urge Russia to stop its military aggression and immediately and unconditionally withdraw its troops from Ukraine. This according to the text of a statement. Bloomberg's AMH Annmarie Tadeo join us now. Annmarie, before you depart Bavaria, talk me through what we've achieved in Germany at this G7 meeting.
Well, John, a lot of the stuff that was achieved in Germany is really just setting up the stage for more talks to continue. Of course, there's a lot of urging on a number of factors. That's for the unity, to maintain that unity amongst the G7 and its allies, to support Ukraine, to keep the pressure on President Putin, and then, as you mentioned, of course, to make sure they are steadfast when they are combating against China and urging China to lean more towards the West and stand up for Western values and not continue this support, even though sometimes it's behind the scenes with President Putin. Most interesting, which really got a lot of the talk, of course, is this idea of an oil price cap and as well as a Russian gas cap in Europe. Daniel Flatley, our colleague, just wrote a great piece talking about how it's a Rubik's Cube, and the fact that it got into the text that they want to even continue discussions is a big deal. But for this to actually hit the market, it is going to take a number of laborious conversations with the private sector, insurance companies, shipping companies, as well as massive buyers, especially for crude, Beijing being one, New Delhi being the other, and then Russia, of course, being willing to sell that crude for the cap that Western allies decide on.
This is question number one for me, Maria. Just listening to everything that AMH has just gone through, how do you achieve that oil price cap that they're looking to talk about without including India and China? And at the same time, the president's going to go from Bavaria over to Madrid, and there's the potential for NATO to criticize China. At the same time, they need China on board to do something about Russia. Maria, can you square that one for us?
Well, it's a difficult one to square, but the focus, of course, as you say now here, is NATO. But the way they see it is that this is not about the oil cap. It's not about specific countries like India and potentially China on the oil. This is a much bigger conversation now about security and defense. And what they argue is that we're going to see the most sweeping changes to that security definition probably since the Cold War. So this is about the weapons and the politics. It's a different type of conversation to that in the G7. Jonathan, if I could say, well, in my view, the NATO this year is much more important than the G7 will be. We know that there's already indications from the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg that allies will say that Russia is, quote, the most significant and direct threat to NATO security. This is not just Eastern Europe. It's now the entire alliance. Remember, they're bound by Article 5. If one country gets attacked, everyone will have to come to their defense. When it comes to China, to your point, they will now say openly that this is a systemic challenge to NATO. The language around it will be interesting. And then, of course, we always circle back to the perennial debate at NATO, and that is defense spending. What the NATO Secretary General now says, and what a change in tune here, is that the 2% of GDP is not the ceiling. It's going to be something that could be extended way beyond that. It's not the floor, it's the ceiling.
Stoltenberg also talking about the progress over Swedish and Finnish membership. Obviously, Turkey has some reservations about some of this, Maria. Walk me through the potential for this to happen anytime soon.
Well, Erdogan is the start of day one here. All eyes are on the Turkish leader. Of course, he says he has some concerns about Sweden and Finland. He says they don't fight enough counterterrorism and terrorist operations. Now, a lot of the critics say that this is just Erdogan trying, of course, to get concessions and time with the president of the United States. But I have to say today, Jonathan, the mood has really shifted from the morning to now. And there is optimism that a deal to include these two countries to NATO may be on the cards by the end of the summit.
Range of headlines from Stoltenberg also on China. Disappointed China won't condemn the Russian attack, but they don't regard China as an adversary. Annmarie, I want to leave you with the final word here. What would they describe China as?
Well, they're not going to say adversary, but they are going to say that China is strategically a hurdle, if you would. The exact text hasn't been completely defined yet, Jonathan, but they're getting there. A little bit more pressure on China. I would say it's a huge 180 from the last time we got this text from NATO. In 2010, China was not mentioned, but Russia was, and Russia was mentioned as a partner. And part of the reason why they will not go as hard as saying adversary on China is because the country I'm standing in right now, Germany. They have massive, among other European allies, have massive trade with China, economic ties, business ties, and they want to make sure they can balance these two struggles.